Neff, you are the author of this book.
That's right, and the second one too.
Yeah. I actually don't have the volume two. I want to talk to you about that, and I want to get that actually because it's
Okay, all
very
right.
interesting. But just to start things off, would you mind? I've talked about your book on my channel, but would you mind introducing yourself to those of my viewers who might not know who you are?
Well, yes, it's a well. First of all, Miko, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me for this interview. As you all heard, my name is Neff Irizarry II. I'm a Latin jazz guitar player, and I've studied with Steve Kahn, Victor Mendoza, Gary Burton, Dave Samuels, John Damian, Brett Wilmot, a whole bunch of cats. Besides my own, performance experience with Eddie Henderson, Lonnie Liston Smith, Azimuth, the all those characters. And Julio Romero of Funny All Stars, and also Jimmy Haslip. I also the author of these two books as well through Share Music, Contemporary Latin Jazz Guitar, Volume One and Volume Two solos. Besides having recorded on various records, and I have a new record out on Blue Canoe Records with Jimmy Haslip as the co-producer,
Nice.
and that's entitled Cambio.
So for those who don't know, Jimmy Haslip was, or he used to play. He was the bass player with Yellow Jackets, but I don't think he's playing with them anymore, right?
No, he's not. He's playing with Jeff Lorber, and he was also playing with Alan Holdsworth in the last
Yeah,
two.
yeah, he's a legend.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So my channel is all about books, and this is your book, and as you said, there's a volume two.
Yes.
So could you describe the content of those two books, reading, if it's
Okay.
possible? Like,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. In a nutshell, well, first of all, it's important to highlight that this material existed before, basically in basically from by word of mouth, and also in in some type of institutional form, but it has never been conceived in the way that I present it, and that's just the reason that this is one of those sides of the jazz continuum of jazz pedagogy that isn't really spoken too much about unless you go uh, down that specific manner of study, and
mhm.
that would be in the traditional terms of going into Afro-Cuban, Cubop, and Brazilian, which was the original definition of studying Latin jazz. So, what my first book does is, since we began with that form, I focus upon the Afro-Cuban school of Latin jazz guitar, and I begin with showing how to play. What is a montuno? What is a guajeo? I come up with strategies on how to play that on guitar. Many think that it's imitation. I noticed that you mentioned on the previous book review that it's imitation of piano. It really isn't really exactly that,
Mm,
because we'll talk into that a little bit later. But
yeah,
actually, it's taking what was played on tres and
right.
cuatro, traditional instruments, and the piano, and applying that to guitar in a way that is logical for guitar while still maintaining that sound of what the folk instruments, how they played it, and so what I do is that not only do I show how it is to guitar, but I also show many different examples based in precedent, because usually when they show this type of material, they give just one set of this is how you can do it, or they never speak about who did it. and in what type of circumstance. So the book goes in detail about who
Yeah.
did it, when did they do it, and not only the Latin, the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans, but it also goes into the American jazz guitar
Yeah.
players that ventured into that. How did they do that? So I talk about cascara and clave, which are quite important. The rhythms of the style, how to phrase, and I go into some improvisational aspects at the end of the book, as well as great play alongs so that you can play along with it and some of my compositions, so you get an idea as to, not only is he an author and a pedagogue, but he's also a composer. So the second book actually dives into what you're supposed to do as a soloist. So this will actually um, interest the interme. It'll interest whatever level you're on, but what it'll do is it'll give you it'll talk to you about jazz improvisation through the lens of a Latin jazz guitarist, or through the Latin jazz tradition. So I talk about what chord scales, what motives, how motives are developed, uh, chordal chordal passages, and I have about 56 solos that are transcribed, of which the Benson solos are not included, but the excerpts are included in the book.
Mm.
So and then there's what was it, 17 play-alongs, as well as an extensive an extensive history about the guitar and suggested listening list,
Yeah.
which is in both books.
That's something I really appreciate when in any book where you actually go to the source where this stuff is coming from, so you can hear it. Not every book does that, so that's something that I really appreciated. And yeah, I was just watching before this. You have transcribed solos, and then you have some of those guitar players as guests on your channel, right? Like with Peter Bernstein.
Yeah, that's right. With Peter, it's great. We actually did a guitar workshop together as well.
Yeah.
So it was great to interview Peter, and I have two solos of Peter's
Oh, okay.
that is in the book. And matter of fact, I could tell you,
Con Alma, right?
yeah, Con Alma, of course, and then also I think it was only Con Alma, but I'm mixing up because when we played together, we actually had a great live version of um, of uh, of of Blue Bossa, believe it or not,
Oh, yeah.
which is fantastic to hear him. And if you see in that interview, he speaks about his background with Latin music in New York City. The
Hmm.
same thing when unfortunately I didn't get a chance to record that interview with Bruce Foreman. Bruce Foreman had the same background as well,
Right.
growing up in San Francisco. So, and that's who I was thinking about when I had it on Tintindeo and then Besame Mucho. So I was thinking about Bruce Foreman had the two solos actually
Okay.
transcribed.
Yeah, so uh, there's a lot here in what you already said. I have some questions prepared, and I don't even know where to begin. I just feel like we've went a little bit too quick with your introduction there. Because one thing I want to that surprised me, I watched your interview on, oh, I can't remember this, a podcast, and you are you are American, right? That's what I thought you were in the States, but you are American.
I'm American. I'm Puerto Rican.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you're born in the States, or
Yes, I
ah,
was
okay,
born in the States, a first generation, but my identity is Puerto Rican. So when
right.
people ask me, I always say first Puerto Rican.
So you speak
Um, that
Spanish, fluent Spanish,
I
and
do.
yeah.
I'm fluent bilingual, and it's just fantastic. Matter of fact, last year I was invited back to the island, to the Conservatorio de Música de Puerto Rico, as a featured guest. So that was a great honor.
Oh yeah, that is then doesn't Eddie Gomez teach there or
He used to teach there, absolutely. He used to be there and I think he still makes an appearance
Okay.
once in a while there in the jazz department. But he was there. That's right.
But what surprised me, I don't know, correct me if this is wrong, but you live in Finland.
Yes, in Helsinki. Yeah,
Wow, okay.
yeah.
So
So
how,
actually, I'm fluent in Finnish and in
no
Swedish.
way.
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
and I speak Portuguese as well. So I'm a polyglot. Yeah,
That's crazy because Finnish is I'm half Finnish.
that's what I figured. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna.
but I don't speak. I'm trying to learn it, but we're digressing here. But uh, it's a very, for those who don't know, it's extremely difficult language.
Yeah, it is definitely. Yeah, I think that the next difficult is probably Latvian is pretty
Hmm.
difficult as well. Yeah, and then you
Okay, I
have
just needed to sort that out because I was surprised to hear that you did. But so, yeah, I just assumed you were in the States. So we're actually pretty close geographically.
yeah, definitely,
Right.
definitely.
Interesting. Um, yeah, so what, as I said, one thing I appreciate about that's your books is that when you can, there's even a discography of recommended listenings and a timeline.
Yeah,
And because my problem with Latin jazz guitar, when I was studying music, a lot of people were like really into that stuff, the Afro-Cuban stuff. The bass players were all over it, the drummers. And there's this books called Grooves for the Afro-Cuban Drum Set or something like that. People were studying this stuff.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's also sheer music, right?
I mean, yeah, that one's not on. I think that's on. What was it now? I think it was some. It used to be, I think, on Drummer's Workshop, I believe.
Okay.
I think something from New York. I can't remember, but that's no,
But
that's not on
but
there.
everybody was like into it. Like, yeah, let's play this stuff, and it's fascinating. But for me as a guitar player, it's like I don't know what to do. And then you listen to the music, and you don't really know what to listen to
Yeah,
because it's not as obvious. Like if you're studying Brazilian guitar, for example, it's very clear. This is what how you're supposed to do it, and these are the recordings and the artists you need to listen to.
yeah.
So it's there's this risk that we lose interest because for as a guitar player. But you're proving us wrong, right? Like there is a lot of guitar, but
There is indeed.
and
Yeah.
um, so first of all, what is Latin jazz in your estimation? Like, what how would you? Uh,
Well, the yeah, that's a good question because as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, that term Latin jazz is in some ways misused because
uh
it's a really broad term. Because nowadays, Latin jazz could mean anything from flamenco mixed with jazz, cumbia mixed with jazz, everything in South America. So it's not you have to really think about, all right, what type of Latin jazz, and you have these subgroups. But if we go back to what it originally was, it was originally Cubop, right? It was championed in the 40s, Mario Bausa, Dizzy Gillespie, Chano Pozo, and then for me, and then it became evolving, and what had happened was that when the Cuban embargo happened, then the Latin jazz took on another meaning, that the Brazilian music started to take over more. Now, both diasporas of music, the Afro-Cuban, Puerto Rican, and Brazilian, they all have many similarities with jazz harmony. Even if the rhythms are different, then the jazz harmony is there. It, it,
mhm.
it it's always been there because in that hemisphere there's this cross pollination, musical cross pollination that's
Yeah.
going on. So to answer your question, in my mind, the original Latin jazz is that, but um, but nowadays you have to. It's more of a broader term.
But
It
is
mixed
it?
together.
Could
Yeah.
you say that it's actually also New York?
Yes, well, yeah, that's good that you put that because yes, it was championed in New York,
Uh-huh.
basically. You know, the Cubop was championed in New York, absolutely, and that's where Latin jazz, the marriage of the jazz sensibilities, jazz harmony with Latin rhythms,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, yeah,
And
so
in that Afro-Cuban tradition, there isn't really a lot of guitar like an electric guitar or it's more like the other string
well,
instruments, right?
well, the thing is that okay, that's a great question because guitar has always been there. The thing
Hmm.
is that it's always served as a function of an accompaniment function on a nylon string.
Okay.
What I talk about in my in see this book was a product of my master's thesis, which had a bit of musicological research as well. So what a lot of what we don't understand since we didn't live in that time period, what had happened was that the acoustic instruments, because they weren't the guitar, there wasn't amplification.
Right.
It wasn't possible for the guitar to make that next leap. Therefore, the piano took over. The tres was already high pitched and could cut through. The same thing
Mm.
with the cuatro in Puerto Rico. Um, Now the thing was because the particular thing, because of geography and because of the embargo, it was the instruments, they did have certain instruments, folkloric instruments, but because the guitar was popular at that day, everybody wanted to go buy a guitar. It's not like, hey, I want to go out and buy a tres or a cuatro. These first generation Americans that their parents were Cuban or Puerto Rican or Dominican, the kids wanted an electric guitar, because they heard the Beatles and things like this,
Hmm.
you know. So I'm not a musicologist, and I have colleagues that are great at speaking about that. So I won't go into detail, but there are these type of issues that, unfortunately, confine the guitar to what it was, and this resurgence of the guitar that I'm demonstrating in the book, and also because of Carlos Santana, and help to
Hmm.
bring that forward, bring it to light. So yeah, I think I did
Yeah, yeah. So I was just, are you saying so I'm very ignorant when it comes to this stuff,
it's okay.
but did you, it sounded like you were saying that the tres is Cuban and the cuatro is Puerto
Yeah,
Rican?
yeah, exactly. Well, this the tres is from Cuba, right?
Uh-huh.
And the guitar in a typical trio, you would have a guitar, a tres, and then you might have another guitar, or you might have a requinto, which is half size of the guitar,
Okay.
right? And El Güero Gil was the creator of the requinto from Mexico, and I mentioned about him in the book. The most famous tres player, or tresero as they call it, would be Arsenio Rodriguez, and I
Right.
mentioned I mentioned him in the book. That's in Cuba. When we get to Puerto Rico, then we have the cuatro, which is a five-string instrument with double courses. We have a tiple, which is smaller. We have a bordonnois, which is bigger. So we have a lot of these. These are all related to the vihuela because when the Spaniards came over, they brought the guitar and they brought the vihuela, right?
Okay.
So from that instrument and from the lack of having instruments, the colonists, they went ahead and made instruments that were based upon that, right?
So I also watched, you sent me a link to a clinic you're doing at Berkeley College.
Yes, that's
But
correct.
that's not an open video, is it
No, not yet. What I'll
okay.
do is I'll probably upload that to
Yeah,
YouTube.
okay. And there you were mentioning Yomo Toro.
Yes, exactly. I mentioned Yomotoro from Puerto Rico, and he was in New York as well. And he's a cuatrista, played cuatro. He's a great guy, and um, uh, I have some of those a couple of his solos actually in the second book, and some excerpts in the
Interesting.
first book
Okay.
as well. Yeah.
Because that's kind of what I'm interested in. I'm always interested in finding out, like digging or delving into the tradition of where everything is coming from and going to like the trying to go to the root or this.
Yeah, the root of it. Yeah.
And I think my viewers are interested in this too, and because my philosophy is that if you want to learn how to play something, a style, a genre, or a tradition, the
Yeah.
first thing that needs to happen is you need to know what it's supposed to sound like.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
be it some kind of world music, or if I'm like I'm playing this Django Reinhardt type music, the biggest problem for people who are trying to learn how to play that is they haven't heard.
Yeah.
And so there's always like these classical recordings, and
Absolutely.
so I want, if I can pick your brain on, like, let's say I'm a jazz guitar player and I don't know what to listen to. And for me, like, if I want to listen to Latin jazz or Latin music in general, if I go to Spotify and just look for salsa music, or that's not even a good term, not everything is gonna be great, you know. Like, it's gonna be a lot of like touristy kind of music.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what are some? First, there's also okay. So there are Latin jazz recordings with actual jazz guitarists playing on them.
Yeah. There
You're
are
talking,
some,
but then
but
there's also
far between. Yeah.
lesser known, or at least lesser known in this part of the world, guitar players who are maybe need more attention. So could you give us like a few recordings or that you think are, I mean, you do this in the book, but who should we listen to?
Well, um, depending on your background and your learning objective and your learning strategy, and how focused you are, it might be the best to listen to a contemporary, right?
Mhm.
Before you go back. Sometimes that is the best strategy. So you keep interested and you're like, oh, okay. So perhaps one of the best persons to listen to in the beginning would be, let's say, Steve Kahn with the
Yeah.
Caribbean Jazz Project. That would be great to listen to. Now, from there, you could easily say, all right, I'm going to go to Edgardo Miranda, right?
Okay.
Which is a
See, I've
Peruvian
never,
guitar player.
I don't know who that is. So,
And yeah, and you can listen to him on a Papo Vasquez record, Breakout, or with Bebo Valdez, that Bebo Valdez lived in Stockholm for
yeah.
a long time. Bebo de Cuba, that's one. I mentioned a lot of these in the discography. From Edgardo, then you might go say, okay, from Edgardo, you might say, okay, who from Cuba? And then you could say Carlos Emilio Morales from Iraquere. You could do that. Um, from him, then we start getting to a place where we need to go to some older guitar players, right?
Hmm.
So from there, I would say Juanito Marquez, that he's in the book,
Yeah.
and I might say also Paul Alicea of the La Plata Quartet, um, and then that would be a good place. And then once you're there, of course, you're going to be all right. Well, where do I go from here? What other instruments are influencing the guitar players? So you see, so maybe a second stream strategy would be while you're listening to each guitar player, you could say, okay, I'm going to listen to a tercero or a cuatro player. So then that, and then maybe I would listen to a piano player, right?
Hmm.
So the best things would be okay, Arsenio Rodriguez, Yomo Toro, and go there, and then also have some piano players. and some bass players as well. So you get an idea. So you could have El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico, and then maybe Israel Cachao Lopez, the Cuban jam sessions would be a good thing, like that, or Arsenio's band, right? So it depends, and then if you want Fania, I mean, you can go any which way you want. But just to keep the guitar player interested, and then also if you feel that you want more on the rock side, Latin rock, then the Santana.
Of
And
course, yeah.
what's great in the second book is that I show how Santana and Arsenio Rodriguez, how they're related. And I
Okay.
mentioned a little bit in that clinic as well. But the main thing that, and I don't know if the listeners are aware of this or you were aware of this, but I did a lot of salsa gigs without a piano player, actually.
Hmm.
So the one thing that you have to realize is that this music is meant for people to dance, and
Right.
your conception of time and independence is extremely important. And also the way that you solo, you have jazz sensibilities. In the second book, we have already jazz sensibilities are already visible with Arsenio Rodriguez. There's one solo where he's playing Lydian flat 7 there.
Okay.
Oh, and this is already in the 40s, right? Over a D7 vamp. It's incredible. So, and you have tritone substitute with someone in the 60s. So it shows you that they are listening to Juanito
Right.
Marquez as well. Is soloing in and using whole tone scales and lots of chromatic approaches. So they are, of course, because of the mere fact that you had stated, and you reminded me to share that with the listeners, is that New York City is the epicenter for Latin jazz, and we cannot have there. It's not Latin without the jazz, and it's not jazz without the
Hmm.
Latin. Even Jelly Roll Morton said we need that Latin tinge. In the heart of the second line is the clave, right?
Right. So
So
yeah, I want to talk about a few of those key like musical terms that you're dropping here. But what if you want to listen to like recordings with actual jazz players? Like there are some with Barney Kessel or
yeah, Barney Kessel has that record, and I mention it. From my memory, I
is
think
it
it's called.
A Cal Jader recording he's on or?
No, no. Actually, Barney Kessel's not on a Cal Jader, not that I know of. It's actually Attila Zoller and Kenny Burrell are
Oh yeah,
on
yeah,
it,
Kenny Burrell.
and also Bobby Redfield. Jimmy Rainey's on it early.
Oh yeah.
But he doesn't solo on there. He's just playing. He's just reading a part.
Hmm.
Um, and there's also Danny Embry. Also, there's Zunigar, that's there, also another guitar player. But of the classic guitar players, there's Grant Green playing on the Latin bit, but he
Yeah,
doesn't play on clave. But
yeah,
then you have George Benson. That if you go to my YouTube channel and you see the Benson solos are there, which are great Benson
yeah.
solos,
Of course, yeah.
and those excerpts are there as well. So that it's just fantastic what they're doing. But like I had mentioned in the Berkeley clinic, that the way that the early beboppers played, the jazz guitar players played on Latin music, they had such a strong triplet rhythmic sense that
Yeah.
they were always with the cascara and with the clave, and I'm sure that if you asked them what it was, maybe they knew what it was, maybe they didn't.
Yeah.
But just because they had their ears open and their performative experience playing with a lot of people, then they get it, and they understand, and this brings me to Peter Bernstein, that he mentioned to me he listened to a lot of Eddie Palmieri, this one record,
Yeah.
and when we were playing, I got a
You
recording
remember
of
what recording that was?
He mentions it on there. I don't
Yeah, we
recall.
can.
There's a
I can
lot of
check the.
Palmieri recordings, but the mere fact that they're listening to the dance music actually tells you a lot. Actually tells you a lot. And as a guitar player, to play this music, you've got to understand that. You've got to understand the melodic sense, and when they do play lines, it seems like it's just a straight eight line, but it's not really a straight eight line because the way that they're separating the lines, right, with different type of contrapuntal devices, or whether they have leaps in the lines, or where they're accenting. That's accenting and aligning with the cascara de clave at the moment, which I mentioned in the book in
Mhm.
depth. Yeah.
So we should maybe mention you mentioned Steve Kahn there. So you studied with Steve Kahn,
Yeah.
I think. So
Yeah.
yeah, we should also mention that you. So you are a graduate from Berkeley, is that?
Yeah, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree. Yeah.
Oh,
And I
both from Berkeley.
from Berkeley. Yeah.
So you were there when some heavy hitters were there. I think you.
Oh, yeah. Antonio Sanchez, he played
Oh
on my
wow.
recital, my senior recital. He played Ruben Rogers, Fausto Cuevas. Who else? Ryan Shore was there, the film composer. Wow. I can't remember everybody. There were a lot of guys. I mean, I remember Danilo Perez was still there. I remember that Rosenwinkel Kurt came for. He did the first clinic. I saw that
Uh-huh.
he did at Berkeley a long time ago. Uh, Wolfgang Muschspiel was still playing around with Mick Goodrick.
Okay.
Torsten de Winkel, I remember he was there, and then he went on tour with Pat. Who else was there? Yeah, those are some guys that come to mind
So that's
straight
where you
away.
studied with Steve Kahn, or
Yeah, Steve was what had a visiting artist residency.
okay,
That's where I studied with him. I was also studied with, like I mentioned, with Brett Wilmot, with John Damian, Rick Peckham, Larry Bayonne. So Damian and Wilmot are all authors in their own right as well, and
okay,
same thing. And Kurt Shoemate, all those guys. So that was a a heavy crowd to study with. You know that you had
I
to
bet.
have your stuff together.
So did you kind of discover Latin jazz there, even though you
Yeah,
are
yeah. Well, that's funny that you asked that because I remember that growing up in Virginia, my parents they had music on all the time. My brother was
Mhm.
DJing, and my other brother played 12-string guitar. So, and then I had an uncle that played cuatro in Puerto Rico, and so I was just listening to the Led Zeppelin and blues and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I had a neighbor that played guitar. He um he he was an incredible guitar player. I'll tell you that, as he almost made it for James Brown's band, but
Oh
that
wow.
didn't work out. But anyhow, but so what had happened with me was that when I got to Berkeley I remember in the first semester, I studied with John Wilkins, not Jack Wilkins, and we were playing some Brazilian music, and I really loved it, Jobim, and I know that music quite well as well. So, but then what had happened was that um, I had an ensemble with the vibraphonist Victor Mendoza,
Okay.
and and then he tells me playing clave. And my parents never told me about clave. I mean, we listened to salsa at home, and we listened to cumbia, we listened to son, but they never said, "Hey, this is what this is." We just knew it for what the dance was. So when he told me to play in clave, I knew how to do it, and I couldn't explain it. And then I
Oh yeah.
saw that this is something that I really like, and I really love it. And in Victor's group, I loved vibraphone. I always loved vibraphone. That's something, when I heard that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go to Berkeley, because I wanted to stay with Gary Burton and I wanted
Oh
to
yeah,
play
of
with
course,
those
yeah.
guys, you know. So and I love those records with Pat, Passengers and whatnot, and it's just something still to this day.
Yeah.
So so what had happened was that there was a piano player, I couldn't ask my teachers because I wanted to be a bebop guitar player. I wanted to play straight ahead and do that. So I was studying to do that and doing a lot of transcribing, but at the same time, I was trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to really do? And I was transcribing piano, learning that. And then when I got with Steve, I told Steve what I wanted to do, and he said, "All right, well, you got to check this out." So I remember going with him and buying records and talking with him. That
Wow.
my relationship never really ended with him. You know, it's funny because I saw that you did a review of those chord
Yeah.
concepts and the pentatonic concepts. Well, man, when I studied with him, he had a big book of all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
So I know all that stuff, all the background of that. So which is pretty evident when I'm doing these montunos and things and the harmony. I don't know if you noticed, but it's a lot of that stuff going on. So basically, I found myself at the same time. I said, okay, you know, the thing as when you're born in the States and you're Latino, you're always trying to find your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my Puerto Rican identity was a lot stronger, even though I grew up in Virginia. It still is a lot stronger. And now that I've lived in Europe for a long time, I'm just a world citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I can't imagine there being too many Puerto Ricans in Helsinki, but
no, no. Well, there's another one, and my two daughters. So,
oh, yeah.
you
But
know.
Steve Kahn is thoroughly American, right? Like
Yeah,
he's
he is. He is. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But I find that fascinating because I think I could be wrong here, but the same thing kind of happened. I'm sure you know this Lionel Luiki, the
Yeah, Lionel Luecki. Yeah.
yeah Lueki, maybe it's how he went to Berkeley. I remember seeing some interview with him, and he was trying to sound like George Benson and everybody else. But then he kind of discovered his own identity too, which
Yeah.
has been obviously he's been very successful with a
Yeah.
kind of
That's
African
one of the
influence.
great Yeah, that's one of the great things about Berkeley is that you learn the tradition, but they really stress on artistry. At least back then with me, it was you know to put it to back then. In order to study with Steve Kahn, you were picked. It was only a handful of guys that could
Hmm.
go and do that, and they were extremely selective. But at the same time, they always they always, like I said, stress the traditional and stress that you got to know how to play guitar, but at the same time try to find your own thing, which is really important, and which is really what the greats, our elders, how they think, how they believed.
Hmm.
That otherwise, how else are you going to have a career, and do things, because people are going to hear that, when you're playing, they're going to hear, oh, is this another copy, or is this
Right.
something actually interesting, is this something special, you know and whether it happens in the beginning or it happens later, it tends to happen all the time.
Yeah.
It really does. Yeah.
So if we could just there are all these musical terms you've been I think most of my viewers know what the clave is. And so there's clave, and then there what are some other montunos, things that you talk about in the book.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, could you just
Okay, so a clave is a two-bar ostinato or
right?
pattern, right? And there's a son clave and there's a rumba clave.
Yeah.
And you have either two hits in the first bar and three hits in the second bar, therefore it's 2-3, or you have the opposite, 3-2. The son clave is ta 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 da da. That's 3-2.
Uh-huh.
2-3 is da 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 da. And then if we're in rumba clave, right? So and I'll do the 2-3 ba 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 ba, right? And then you have the 3-2. So 1, 2, 3, 4 ba 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 ba. And I show how you can play that. And the way that in the book I do it is extremely as just as rudimentary, so that you get it in your hands. Although the guitar player would never really play that,
Yeah.
yet you never really play that
So it
rhythm.
is, just to clarify, it is an actual percussive instrument.
Yeah, it is as well. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and I have my clave is packed away somewhere.
Oh yeah,
So
but I don't think most people know what it is. But
yeah.
it's not always. I mean, if it's Latin jazz, it's a jazz group. Nobody's actually playing.
No, no, no.
It's more
Usually
something
it's
you feel,
implied.
right? Like,
Yeah, it's implied. It's implied. It's played on the in the drums. Usually
mhm.
the drum set will play it with the stick on the snare, a rim click that way. Usually, and then or it's implied throughout the drum set what they're doing, right? Usually the cascara, which is the pattern, and I mentioned this in many clinics, that it's very difficult for if you don't have any experience playing with ostinato based music,
Mhm.
then it's a bit difficult to get into the whole idea of an ostinato pattern that's continuously repeating. So I always talk about playing with the cascara, which is a 2 bar rhythm that's played on the shell. Cascara means shell, and it's played on the
Okay.
shell of the timbales or on the floor tom of a drum set, and that would be in and that would be in. I'll do it from 2-3. So it's da 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 da, and then you can clap the clave da 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 da. And the first time I played rumba clave, and the second time I played son clave, like that. And and it's go ba 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 ba, right? Ba 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 ba. So da 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 da, and then you start from the second side to play it, and it turns around, like, right?
But I find with because I'm a teacher, right? Like I teach
Okay.
like a pre-college type situation, and for me, I sometimes talk about this stuff. I've shown them your book too, right? And the drum teachers obviously talk about this stuff, and sometimes you get this kind of attitude, or why do we need this? Like, well, so it's like it's kind of the heartbeat of the. How should I describe it? It's like, how would you describe it? The clave is
It's the root rhythm of it. It is the backbone of
the
the music.
backbone is the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
Because all of the melodies and everything is built upon it, how it aligns. I show that concept of alignment. That concept of alignment, we actually take that for granted. If you would do the same thing in R&B, funk,
Mm-hmm.
right, in straight ahead, you can do the same thing, but we take it for granted. So I mentioned in a clinic, I mentioned the art of playing time is hugely underrated. A lot of people think that they play in time, but
Mm-hmm.
actually they don't, because they don't feel the subdivision, and then
Mm-hmm.
they don't feel where is the strong pulses there, right?
Yeah.
And if you could be playing the right notes, but if you're not playing in time, or playing the right type of rhythm, then or accenting in the right places, the articulation, then it just won't happen. And you're wondering, well, why is that I'm playing the right notes, but it's
Yeah.
just not happening? And it's something that many guitar players overlook. That
Yeah.
for me, time is you're never done with time, and you're never the way I heard time when I was in my 20s is completely different, and I'm in my 50s now,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's completely different. But but there are many things along the way that help to do that. It
So
helps.
it's like it's bringing life to your, if you're feeling the clave, because it's, as you said before, it's dance music.
Yeah.
So, and even
Well,
like classical music is often dance music, like Bach. We've
yeah.
so if you can understand that, this is my how I think about it.
Hmm.
It will bring your time. It's not just keeping time.
Yeah.
It it adds a dimension of life to the how you would phrase.
Absolutely.
It's hard to put words on it, but
No, well, it does because we get into basically interpreting the rhythm with its macro and micro aspects,
mhm,
right? And and also it gets into basically the feel that people say, or
yeah,
duende, or swing, right?
yeah,
Or ginga that they say in Brazilian music.
okay, yeah,
So when you're playing with the feel, I remember my guitar teacher would say, "Well, you got to play with the feel," you know, and and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I mean, I played for a while with a funk band and in England, and we backed up Eddie Henderson, and that was a completely different school to
yeah,
be able to play those 16th notes and really make them groove in the pocket, and understanding where it is in between, where are you within the pocket, and to be able to keep that consistently for an hour or 2 hours,
hmm,
you know and then to be able to do that in Brazilian music, and then to be able to do that in a salsa situation, or to be able to do that in straight ahead, and different regions have a different emphasis on different things. If you're playing with New York guys, then you have that type of thing. If you're playing, it depends.
yeah.
Yeah, and
That's what I like to tell my students, that even if you're not gonna go to Cuba and play this music, understanding that feel is gonna help you if you're playing
yeah,
other.
because jazz is not what people think it is. It's actually a marriage of all of these. It's
Yeah,
inclusion and diversity and all of these things. If it wasn't for this melting pot of the American experiment in New Orleans and all that, we wouldn't have. I mean, where else could you have someone like, from Mexico go and play with Pat Metheny and do all this. I'm talking about Antonio Sanchez, and
yeah.
still play incredible, swing like
Oh
crazy,
yeah.
be able to play. And I mean, and then you hear somebody like David Weckl as well. That you hear that, and you hear Ignacio Berroa, and that is incredible in the swing, or Fidel Morales. So, and you hear Miguel Senon. It doesn't matter where you're from, but you need to have this. And of course, John McLaughlin, who's English and playing, classical Indian music on guitar.
Yeah.
So it's just true testament of how versatile and how wonderful we are to be musicians, and to be able to learn this. Learn it's multiculturalism at its finest, the best.
I totally agree. I think
Yeah.
jazz is the most um how should I put it, most diverse type of, and it's that's the strength of jazz, and also it's very American. Like it's the most American art form, I think.
Yeah. Well, besides country and everything.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's forgot
Blues.
about that. but I mean, you don't take heavy metal for heavy metal doesn't. It's not as, people are gonna hate me in the comments now, but you don't find a lot of Indian influence in heavy metal. I'm sure there is some of that, or
Well, if we talk
but I'm
about
not saying that heavy metal isn't good. I'm just saying the uniqueness of jazz is that it embraces everything.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, as an academic, I guess we're just focus as a disclaimer, we focus on just straight ahead and jazz, and we can say that. I think as far as the metal and all of that's concerned, and different styles, I think the polyrhythmic nature and some of the interesting harmonic nature as well, the modal nature and things like that are what's actually interesting for me when I listen to guys like Meshuggah and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah,
It's and Soundgarden and whatever. I mean, it's just amazing, and my hat's off to them.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But you're right. There's a certain thing. Well, inclusivity. There are a lot of Brazilians that play heavy metal, and a lot of
Yeah.
Finns that play heavy metal. But but you're right. To a certain
I think that's why I was drawn to jazz,
Mm.
because I started with classical guitar and then
Oh, there you go.
yeah, I
Nice.
switched to jazz because it was more, I don't know, it was more appealing to me. The
Yeah.
whole kind
Well,
of scene, or the mentality and everything. So it sounds like I'm dissing other genres. I'm not.
no, no,
Uh,
you're not. No, you're not. Well, when you mentioned the classical side, I mean Leo Brauer, Guyun from
yeah, and then you have
Igor Rojas.
what's
They're
his name in Brazil? The guitar player and piano players. Egberto Gismonti. He's
and you have no and oh my goodness, and you have Rafael Rabello. That's another one.
I don't know that name
Oh
actually.
man, that's incredible. And Yamandu Costa. Actually, Rafael Rabello is the seven string guitar player, the great one that he died unfortunately. I think it was in the early '90s, but he was the seven string um, uh, virtuoso before Yamandu, and I think and you can hear it. Yamandu, you can hear it in Yamandu's playing, and I think there's even maybe a video of Yamandu playing with Rafael. I think
Okay.
and then before him you have Bolacetti, I wanted to touch on something that you said. In Brazilian music, the guitar, it, it it's basically the national instrument. The
Yeah.
guitar, it's very clear the role, and the piano is basically imitating things from the guitar. The same thing the piano did in Afro-Cuban music as well. The guitar is actually the national instrument also, except because of the situation. Well, the same thing happened in Brazil. They have violão, which is a nylon string, violá
Mhm.
de sete, seven string. Then you have the cavaquinho, and then you have
Mhm.
the violão, the caipinha, which is the this. I think it's got 10 strings and they're doubled as well. So you know, you have these related bandolim. You also have in Brazil. So there's many similarities, but you're right, because of bossa nova and samba, you really hear that guitar function is there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the dominant role of the piano in that way, if you want to make a generalization. But
But
and it's
the clave is not as defined in Brazilian music, right? There is.
Brazilian music, that's a completely different thing, and it is ostinato based.
Uh-huh.
And but a Brazilian will tell you differently, and it depends. So it could be ta 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 tas 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 ta tas 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 ta tas 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 ta tas tas, right? And depending where the whether it's samba or bossa nova, and where you kind of have that get 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 you have that in bossa nova, which it resembles a clave, but it's not really, because it doesn't line up the same place as where the
Yeah.
clave comes up, right? So but anyhow, uh I, I I'm sure that we could talk about Brazilian music, but we're going to talk about the Afro-Cuban.
Yeah. Don't want to digress too much.
Yeah, yeah.
But so it's interesting also that it's because the guitar can't cut through the other instruments. That's why they used the tres and everything, right? Because it. But in Brazilian music, the drums are not as loud, I guess, and I played Gypsy Jazz or Django Reinhardt. They solved the problem with getting rid of the drums. So
Hmm.
there are no drums,
Yeah.
and you can hear the guitar. But there's a pragmatic reason why people do things a certain way. But now we have electric guitar, and you can amplification and everything.
Yeah.
So
Well, yeah. Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that because, during the 60s with that band, Willie Bobo's band, that had that had Sonny Henry on guitar. He was an African American guy that played on those recordings, and Willie Bobo, the pianos were out of tune in the 60s. They didn't have any, synthesizers. So he called a guitar player to play, and Sonny Henry was the guitar player,
uh-huh.
right? And then you have this other band, which is La Plata Sextet, like I mentioned, a La Playa Sextet. They actually had two guitar players, right, instead of just one guitar player with a big band. So, you had to appeal to what was popular at the same time because they were businessmen. They wanted to gig, right? And in order for a guitar player to gig at that time in a Latin band, if there was a piano player and they were the leader, they're gonna, form their own band and go out and go get gigs. So that was the deal. It was just the nature of survival. So they wanted something different because all bands had piano, right?
Mhm.
So that's
So
the thing.
we have to kind of, if we want to play this today as jazz guitar players, we have to kind of sort through all this stuff and find a way, something that works. And I mean, your book can really help for
Yeah.
somebody who wants to navigate through all this
Absolutely, absolutely. The book and listen to some great
listening.
recordings, and yeah, that helps. And if they can get a hold of me, that helps even more.
Mhm.
You know, definitely.
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think that's a good way to end this. But before we finish, what if people want to find out more about or where can they get the book, or if you want to listen to your music or see you play, or
Great. Okay. I'll talk about that. Well, you can get the books on sharemusic.com. Yeah, you can go there and order the books. I have two records as a leader. The first record, unfortunately, is out of print, which was Nepenthe, but you can find it on Spotify online. And then my latest record, which is out on Blue Canoe Records. I'm a Blue Canoe Records artist. Is named Cambio Change. And then you can get that on all the digital outlets, whatever you prefer. And then you can go to my YouTube channel as well, where I have some videos of me demonstrating the material. And there also it's divided up in two parts. That's the first book and the second book, so you can play along. Uh, and I get this a lot. A lot of questions. People asking me about a third book. There's a third book that's going to be coming.
oh, interesting.
And in the third book, because of the popular demand, I will include some tabs there, and this is going to be geared more for the beginner.
Okay,
Um, and then what it'll do is it'll basically put add it as a good opening ramp to get to the first book and get to the second book as well.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I mean, we could go on talk forever about this stuff, but
Is there
um,
any other question that you might have?
let me just see here. I wrote down a whole bunch of, but I think we covered most of what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I have a lot of stuff here, and I'm gonna try to put a lot of links to
Oh,
to
thank you.
everything the
Great.
names that, and there's so much I want to look into myself. Like you already mentioned all these names. Oh, just one more thing. Azimuth.
Yeah.
That's
Azimuth. is a Brazilian
Brazilian group,
funk
right?
band. Excuse
And
me?
it's a Brazilian group?
Yeah, it's a Brazilian funk band. It's a trio. As a matter of fact, they're going to be in Fasching. I think on tonight they're playing in Fasching. By the way,
Really? So yeah, Fasching is the jazz club in Stockholm.
Stockholm. Yeah,
I
they're
thought they played. I didn't know they played. I thought it was like in the 70s or
no,
something.
they still play. Unfortunately, Mamao, the Ivan Conchi, the drummer, and Bertrami, Jose Roberto Bertrami, the Fender Rhodes player, piano player, he died. They both died.
Okay.
So Alex Malieros, my good friend and the bass player, he's still running it, and he's got Renato Massa, which is a legendary drummer, and I can't remember the keyboard player, but the keyboard player does a great job, and it's a shame I can't remember his name. But yeah, I played with the original trio. They were in Helsinki, and I sat in on a couple tunes. It was great, man. I have
Oh,
a
cool.
recording somewhere of that. You know, we played Circo Marimbo, and we played what is that? Partido Alto.
Okay. Oh, the tune by the
By
percussion.
Bertrami. Yeah, but I think Flora Purim is singing on that.
Yeah.
There was a recording, yeah, and then they did it, yeah.
Okay.
But
Cool.
Bertrami wrote that song, yeah. But it was just great, you know. I was fortunate that in Finland when I was teaching, I used to teach at the Pop Jazz Conservatory there, and
Mhm.
in Latin scene, I had a Brazilian band, and we were playing all that type of stuff, and I was doing both the Afro-Cuban stuff and the Brazilian stuff. So it's a good thing to understand how that enriches, you know, and plan straight ahead too. So it's a really nice thing. Like we had mentioned earlier in the conversation, it really tends to, for me at least, and for my students, it tends to help them out, especially playing with quarter note triplets and playing with syncopation and
Yeah.
anticipation. It helps them out quite a bit. I've seen many students that they've transformed, you know, within a year just by studying that and practicing that. But yeah,
Well,
you know,
let me know next time you're in Sweden.